Thank you very much, and we have time for some questions. Let me take. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Nithya. That was really wonderful, and your successes are really impressive. I have a question about the motivation structure for the usage of stoves. We've been talking a lot here about social norms, which is about reciprocal expectations within a community, so that behavioral, so that you get behavioral shift on a broad scale. You focused a lot on the consumer preference and the choice of an individual to use a stove because it's a stove that's useful to them. It's a stove that provides, a monetary kind of benefit. Have you done any research on whether there's an infectious quality of stove usage? It seems like the bangle, in addition to being, a symbol of power or a symbol of, immediacy, that it's theirs and so forth, it's also a symbol that I'm using it, and it becomes a kind of an infectious symbol.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I wanted to ask about the role of health in all this, whether women use the stoves more if they're informed about the health benefits to them and perhaps more importantly their children. And to what extent does that play a role in motivating people to continue with this technology over and above the kind of support that you're giving? Is health part of the overall message, or is it more a message about cleanliness and perhaps reducing solid fuel use?
That was really wonderful to see. I mean, the idea of using the data to sort of feedback directly is exactly what evidence-based science should really be about. I'm wondering how many US-based groups or California-based groups have been beating down your doors, because it's the natural tool to do crowdfunding in all manner of ways to support efforts on low-income, environmentally justice challenged Californians and others. So I'd love to hear a little more about the places where you could take this.
Why don't you take care of those three, and then we see if there are any other. Go ahead.
Okay. Great, thank you for those questions. Fauna, yeah, in terms of the infectious quality, I'm still an academic at heart. I mean, that is sort of my background, so I'm really hesitant to say anything about the bangle yet, because it's really early. But I do think that there is that potential. I think there's something really provocative about the visible nature of the bangle, that women are, I don't want to say infectious yet, but it could go in that direction. I think in terms of the broader motivation structure, and Andy, this gets to your question as well, in terms of what are the motivations for use. I think behavior change and use is really complicated. I mean, have you been informed of the health risks of road traffic and traveling in a car? I certainly have, and yet I still drive my kids around. I think we all barbecue. We do all these things that are bad for our health. I don't know how different rural women are in that sense. I just think it's complicated, and I think as people we're not very good at talking about and communicating risk. Is cooking on an open fire far more risky for a woman than me barbecuing? Yeah, but at the same time, quantifying and thinking about that risk, I think this is really where we need social scientists, we need a number of different disciplines coming together to support governments as they think about broader policy. And I think communication is a really important part. I am asked this question frequently about how impactful is the communication around health. I think a lot of messages tend to be really abstract, and they feel really abstract. And what I will say, going back to the bangle, is that there's been something really concrete where, and we found this actually, my thesis work was actually in Bangladesh around arsenic poisoning. And one of the things in the groundwater, and one of the things that I almost found most heartbreaking was that women would say to me, oh, now that the sensors are telling us that there's arsenic, now we really know. And I thought, man, that is heartbreaking, because you already knew, like, you're suffering the health impacts. already in really visible ways, but there's something about sensor technology that, people say to me all the time, oh, well, the sensors don't lie. And unfortunately, that's not even true. I mean, sensors are faulty all the time, I can tell you. But there's something really compelling for people, all of us. We look at data and we think, oh, well, now the data says it. I mean, Cambridge Analytica used that to all of our detriment, right? So there's a real danger in data that we all have to be very aware of as well. And I'm very aware of the power that I do personally wield because I do bring this data. But I will say that there's something really compelling for women when the bangle's telling them like, oh, your carbon monoxide exposure is way too high. That's communicated the health risk to them in a way that, my team in India and other organizations that I know have not been able to. And I'm not somebody who believes in technology is going to take over or solve things. I've always felt technology is one small tool in a very big toolbox, but it has been interesting to see this. And yeah, Dan, thank you so much for that question. So it's sort of two parts to the question. One, yes, people have been really kind of coming to us regularly about certainly the use of the sensors and this approach. And it's something that, we're growing cautiously because unlike in the vaccine side where we have had really incredible scale, outsized scale for kind of the size of the organization and the resources that have been invested, I think scaling the use of data on the cook stove side, we want to be a little bit more cautious because it's so distributed and we want to make sure that it's used in the right ways. But yes, but I mean, in terms of your other comment, I'm really excited actually to explore that with you around sort of what are the opportunities. So we have started dialogue with companies in the US. I think there's a lot of potential interest around this crowdfunding approach where we're saying, it's kind of diverging from the traditional carbon market and saying, we want verifiable results-based impact that is reducing emissions. And absolutely, there's an absolute crowdfunding component that I think needs to be really explored. And we're actually looking for people and partnerships to really kind of get this out there and grow it.
Thank you. We have to first, Professor Soros-Dorowsko.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramanathan 2.0. What a wonderful intervention. It occurs to me, my intuition is that nothing is more dependent on culture, on cultural traditions, on kinship and social organization than cooking. How then are the women in your study culturally talking to each other, talking to their mothers, talking to their grandmothers about this fundamental break with the quotidian way of organizing food and serving food in the local culture?
I was simply going to say that I think it's the personal attention that's the important thing, not the technology. As I've said over and over again, when you really deal with people and you care about them, you get results. And when you don't, and it's hard and distant, you don't get results. And to do that, to put out the amount of effort on a global scale to get that done, is going to take a major revision morally and ethically. I think what you're doing is marvelous and a perfect example of what should be done, as there are various examples, but I think we have to expand them greatly.
I
I think it's the personal attention, but I also think it's the power of naming and the validation of someone from outside their community recognizing what they already know and saying, yes, you have arsenic poisoning. We saw the same thing, and it's a shock to witness, and it's heartbreaking to witness. We saw the same thing in research on prostitution and PTSD. They would say to us, no one ever asked us those questions before. They just ask us about HIV. Same thing.
Right, this closes the question then. Why do you take those three?
I think a lot of the questions are really coming down to kind of what is motivating women. And so, Marcella, your question of sort of the role of communities, and Dr. Raven, your comment as well about the role of communities and the personal attention, I think really goes back to something that Mimi had said about the need for sort of community support. This is something that I believe in really strongly, that as we think about health, individual health, that we need communities, we do need that individual, we need a holistic approach. I think we're all saying the same thing here over and over. Specifically in terms of how are women talking about this with their families and with their relatives, it takes different forms. We've seen women who request clean stoves as a bridal gift during weddings. It takes sort of different forms, but I still think we are a ways away from that kind of mass cultural transformation that does need to happen, where a clean cook stove is aspirational and is, as has been suggested, is part of a holistic kind of integrated solution. Andy, you were talking about this. I absolutely agree. I think if we just look at clean cooking as one thing, we're not going to get to that cultural transformation. So even if we get to the, sort of crowdfunding and all of this, the financing for it, that's not enough. We do need mini grids. We need, you're suggesting integrating with water and sanitation. That makes sense. But I would at least start with the mini grid, providing integration with lighting, cooking. We think of this as a holistic solution, but that is absolutely responding to women's needs and preferences, and that we do that systematically and we do it with care and attention and iteratively. But yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's thank all the speakers and the discussers of the different contributions for a really nice session. Thank you very much. Now I hand it to Dr. Ramanathan 1.0, you say? Okay.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests. It was a long day, but it was a very impressive day. And our distinguished physician from Argentina got us started off in a great manner. And then we heard about several physicians about how to use the public health impact to advance our vision for climate mitigation. We heard about social justice, and then we moved on to solutions. So I'd like to give a round of applause to all the speakers this morning so far.